My name is David Pankratz. I'm the Research and Policy Director for the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. We're sort of the Chamber of Commerce for the nonprofit arts and individual artists here in Greater Pittsburgh. And part of our mantra is to really collaborate. The arts are not in a silo, that we interconnect with all sorts of things, from communities to education to neighborhood revitalization, all those kinds of things. But an area that Lou has brought to our greater attention is the connection between the arts and creative industries, areas such as communications and design and entertainment. And what we've done here, both today but then also in a previous event in June, was to try to see how the arts, and again that's theaters, museums, etc., and individual artists, can connect with these other sectors to kind of create collaborations in new ways.
And what would you say, as we kind of struggle a little bit with the room noise, what would you say are some of the takeaways? What are some of the outcomes of these kind of conferences? Like, you guys sit together and you try to mesh all these different groups, whether it's the Tech Council and the arts groups together. What do we walk away with out of this as pragmatic, actual, tangible things that we should be working on?
Well, I think it's a process. I mean, the first meeting again was on June 19th to get the arts community themselves, and they were the primary participants in that one, aware of the research that Lou was involved in, but also what some of these collaborations might look like. So that was a building awareness. This one was to get more of these different creative communities folks in the room to really talk turkey about, maybe we could collaborate going forward. So I think that's certainly an outcome. I hear it in the hallway. People are talking about, I'm getting back in touch with so-and-so because we're going to cook up this kind of collaboration. But it's also important to have big picture leaders, which was the last panel, as well as Ray Gastel from the Department of City Planning, to see in a big picture way how these foundations, universities, city government can nurture these kinds of collaborations going forward. And I think really building their awareness of the potential of the creative industries was a real tangible outcome from today as well.
Lou, do you want to introduce yourself, Lou? I don't think we got you in on that. And maybe give your perspective.
Hi, my name's Lou Musante. I'm from Echo Strategies, and I was one of the principal investigators on the Pittsburgh Creative Industries Study. I believe one of the big takeaways today for me was in looking at the panel of what I would call industry experts. We had people from entertainment, from design and engineering, from film and from television, and it's great to see that these cross-industry collaborations are occurring in Pittsburgh. One of the major findings of the study, the 7 industries we've studied, have all been growing the past 5 years relative to the United States, where many of these industries weren't growing. So in thinking about how do we better catalyze cross-industry collaboration, I think we're able to see that it's actually occurring in Pittsburgh. It's just how do we increase the speed of that? How do we make it happen fast?
So let's talk about that a little bit. So you guys did a study, and this is part of the Tech Council study? Was that where that originated?
The Tech Council, funded by the Benenden Foundation and Dollar Banks Foundation.
So let's talk about that, because I don't think a lot of people know that went on. Like, we're a little familiar with it. We saw it happening. So what were the goals of that study, and sort of what were the highlights of that study?
The goals were very simple. It was to do an appraisal of the Pittsburgh region, so it's more than Allegheny County, of the creative industries. So the first task on this appraisal was to understand what are the creative industries. And it's very interesting because we identified 3 that were technology-based. That was hardware and software, design and engineering, and data science and telecommunications. 3 of the other creative industries were very arts-based. We had the fine arts, we had entertainment, we had advertising, communication. And then the largest sector within the creative industries was the support services, creative industry support services. As I said earlier, the good news is all 7 of them are growing for the past 5 years relative to the U.S. as a whole. One of the big discoveries and what was a catalyst for these past 2 events that the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council put on was the fact that when we looked at cross-industry collaboration, how much is the design and engineering community talking with the fine arts community. We found, with the exception of the advertising and communications cluster, there wasn't a lot of crosstalk. There wasn't a lot of collaboration. And so I'm really happy that GPAC took it upon themselves to say, look, let's see if we can get the fine arts community together and then help them intersect and connect really with other people in the creative industries. The interesting thing that we have found, though, going around the country, is that the real thing you need to do is just create that connection and get out of the way. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit here, from the freelance community to the corporate community, and if you just get those entities together like we are today, and you hear the noise level here, it'll happen. It'll happen. We just need more of those.
So it's in and of itself, it's interesting that the study happened, right? Because there's an economic reason to investigate these sorts of relationships. So the fact that the foundation saw enough value in understanding this landscape and understanding this ecosystem sort of speaks to its importance, right?
Yes, and again, if you think of the main objective was an appraisal. And why is that? Because the foundation community, the corporate community, the not-for-profit community want to have some numbers. So we've established a baseline that we can measure change from. Change in, are we getting more collaboration? Changes, are these 7 industries still growing? Changes in, are we able to attack some of our brain drain and diversity issues? So having a well-vetted, this was done with the University of Toronto's Rotman Business School, that's one of the leading authorities in the world on place and regions. So by having a scientifically based study and baseline, we can measure change.
So David, if you were going to sort of speak to some of the larger entities in the region, whether they're corporate or foundation-based, what are some things that you would look to in the next 5 years, 3 years, to see happening more so that these kind of relationships can be stronger and we can have more synergy between sort of the arts-based side of things, the technology side of things, and sort of the old institutional Pittsburgh that we've come to know over the years?
Well, I think I could mostly quote the last panel. We brought together people from that variety of sectors, certainly the government sector, foundation, service organization, higher education, and such as that. And each, I think, suggested ways in which they could really be active in encouraging these kinds of collaborations going forward. Sometimes with government, for example, it's getting out of the way, but it's also looking at everything from zoning to others that can facilitate these or not. There are service organizations. Our organization, the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, is very focused on diversity and inclusion, and I think that's certainly one of the themes these days, is that in these kinds of new economies, creative industries, that's really important to the kind of creative workers that you want to attract and retain in your community. And if you're not seen as or valued as a diverse, inclusive kind of place, creatives are not going to want to relocate here. And so we're not, and I think one of the interesting outcomes of the study that Lou mentioned is we're not just competing with Cleveland and Buffalo and whomever anymore. We're trying to compete effectively with Austin, with Portland, with Boston, all of which dwarf us in terms of Bohemian and diversity indexes. So if you want to get the kind of people who are going to kind of generate economic activity in these areas of which the arts sector can be a part, you need to address those macro diversity inclusion issues as well.
One of the things that resonated with us, so one of the presenters, I think it was you, David, actually, was talking about incubator space for artists that was thriving in, was it Philadelphia? It was like a 10,000, it was Lou, it was actually Lou, I'm sorry. That's near and dear to our heart, right? So up the hill in Allentown, we have this odd little co-working space / incubator that we like to think is built for freelance media guys, for folks that are going to be doing animation, video, that sort of stuff, and then working as an organization, as an entity to go and help those guys find jobs and contracts to satisfy their economic needs. Do you see that as something lacking in Pittsburgh? Do you think that there's going to be more and more of these sort of grassroots, self-organized collectives of artists and doers and entrepreneurs?
One of the things about being a little bit older, as I can look at this as, I believe, the third major wave of entrepreneurship in Pittsburgh. I saw one back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then the 90s, and then now. And the space, the shared spaces, the incubators, the accelerators are really I believe have hit a tipping point in the last 5 years, and more things like the hardware store that you're working at really, I think, embellish what we need more of. They create opportunities for people to come in, to experiment, to fail, to learn, and I believe we just need more of them. I also think, as I mentioned earlier, that when you look at places like Orlando and Las Vegas, that aren't very old cities, they don't have the old buildings. They don't have the housing stock we do here. So things like the Urban Redevelopment Authority, the ability to take C-stock housing and convert that to live workspaces would even be great.
Yeah.
So I think the kind of things you're doing and what I see going on in East Liberty with the beauty shop and the Thrill Mill and other things are great. We just need more of them.
Yeah, and that's what we try to educate people about, right? It's great that East Liberty is thriving, but there's all these neighborhoods with all these physical assets that have yet to be developed. And I know there's stuff going on in Millville around these ideas of shared maker spaces, and this is really something that a neighborhood can kind of pin its revitalization on, right? It's an attractor of money, it's an attractor of talent, it's an attractor of conversation, of meetings, of collaboration. You know, literally, probably 10,000 people have come to Allentown just because we're up there doing stuff. So we're eager to see these kind of spaces launch, and we're eager to find how we can interconnect these spaces better. So one of the things we're working on is a universal co-working pass that would allow somebody to be a member up at the hardware store, but then go and find access to these other co-working spaces based on need and based on stuff like that. So for sure, you're right on, I think, in that kind of stuff.
I think that's a tremendous idea. And then the idea of different identities. So each neighborhood has one. How do you make sure it integrates into the neighborhood and it benefits the neighborhood? Like we talked about New Inc. in New York and how they're working into the Bowery neighborhood. And most of these, when you look at these incubator spaces, or however you like to refer to them, it's that ability to integrate into the community and create a win-win situation. Because some communities may not get it, depending on the demographics and makeup of it. But I'm really glad to see that I think Pittsburgh's hit a tipping point. I believe your idea of trying to connect it, almost like the bus pass, to get people to, again, stimulate collaboration across different industry sectors is gold.
And then it becomes sort of less about gentrification and less about, that's the cool neighborhood, and more about how as a city do we collectively solve big problems, start new businesses.
And I think when you mentioned, you think about Millville, which is one of the poorest communities up north, there's just such opportunity there. I look at Wilkinsburg, which is starting to get some attention, McKees Rocks. These are areas that are just fruitful for that, not just East Liberty and a couple of the showcase places now.
I think we've been lucky in learning about that. Lots of other cities perhaps, artists going into communities, then becoming hipster, raising levels and displacing communities. There's been a lot of wisdom gained about that, and I think Pittsburgh may be slightly late to the party, but at the party now. But they've learned from what others have done in a way that both is inviting to new investment, new entrepreneurs, but also respects, works with citizens who are already there, mines the talent that might be there, connects with youth development. That's certainly something we heard a fair amount today as well. So I think we're benefiting from the wisdom and experience of others. So poised to go.
We totally try to encourage people to do that. So there's a couple great groups like Entrepreneuring Youth and that are taking kids from tough neighborhoods and giving them skill sets, and co-working spaces need to play an active role in that. These spaces need to engage some of these groups like Assemble, right? Assemble was here today, and offer up how they can help and stuff like that.